Thank you, Sally. And before we carry on, there was one comment that I wanted to share for you, which is from Yalexi. I was so guilty of thinking about my job and not my career. Your book showed me that and motivated me to leave a cause that I love, but a dysfunctional organization, to a new organization where I found more work balance and fulfillment. Thanks, Sally.
Oh, beautiful. I love getting those messages and I get them all the time. Thank you for sharing that with me, Gregory. That's wonderful. I do want to talk about our old friend, the perfection trap. And this is another one when I send out the behavior sheet to clients that they will get back to me and say, this came up in our top 3, and that is a perfection trap. Believing that, and this is how I see the perfection trap, believing that you are either perfect or failing. There's no middle ground, nothing in between. You are perfect or you are failing. And it's interesting because I get a lot of questions, to what degree is this cultural? To what degree does this have to do with how girls are raised or expectations in the schools? Those questions are different in different situations. But one thing I do know is that organizations as a whole tend also to encourage perfectionism in women, so that even if women didn't arrive there, which they usually do, with a belief that they have to be perfect or they're failing, that organizations bring it out in them. And that is for the reason Marshall and I found some really interesting research showing that that men tend to get promoted on visibility, connections, and being perceived most of all as a real big picture thinker. Whereas women tend to get promoted and rewarded based on being precise and correct in all they do. So it makes sense that we would think that being precise and correct in what we do is going to get us where we want to go, because that's our experience. The problem with it is for more senior positions, that's not what they're looking for. They are not looking for someone who is precise and correct in everything they do. They're looking for someone who's got more of a big picture thinker and can bring some attention to what the organization is doing, has great ideas, strategy about the future. And if you are focused on being precise and correct, you are identifying yourself as a small picture thinker. You're identifying yourself as someone who's good with the details, but probably has pretty much of a micro focus. So this really undermines you if you are looking at moving up in an organization, because through your precision and correctness, you are branding yourself in effect as someone who's not a big picture thinker. So that and it leads to micromanaging. So there's some real problems with it. I'm going to talk about a couple. I think of perfectionism and another habit in the book, which is the disease to please, as the habits that are really toxic at the top. That is, they are habits that in Marshall's frame can serve you well earlier or at the midpoint in your career, but they will become toxic as you move up. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that the more you move up, the more you need to delegate work. And it's very hard to delegate work when you're a perfectionist, because you expect everything to be done perfectly. So you are either overly managing the process to try to assure that the other person's work as presented to you is perfect and meets your very high standard. So you're either doing that, or half the time you end up doing their work yourself because you have this feeling, well, only I can do this the way that it should be done. So you're depriving the people who work for you of an opportunity to learn how to do their job, because you're kind of swooping in and doing that job for them because you believe that you're the one, you need to take the responsibility. in order for that to be perfect. So that is really undermines you. So very hard to delegate, very common to micromanage. Being a perfectionist makes us risk averse, because if something has to be done perfectly, how can we take a risk? So once again, when you're looking for somebody who's a sort of big picture thinker, a big picture thinker is somebody who can take measured risks to move things forward. But if you become highly risk averse, you can't do that. I worked with a big defense contractor here in the United States. And the head of HR told me, she said, we have so many risk averse female engineers in our company that we have decided we are going to start moving our high potential women into jobs that they actually are very unprepared for, so that they can get more comfortable taking risks. Because as it is, they tend not, they tend to be so risk averse. And I hear this a lot from leadership, what can we do to help our women be less risk averse? So perfectionism gets really tied up in that risk aversion. But finally, and this is really, I think, the most important reason, that if we do identify a perfectionistic streak in ourselves, we find a way to address it, because the amount of stress we cause is not a positive thing. We cause stress for ourselves because we hold ourselves to an inhuman standard of doing everything we do perfectly. We can't give ourselves a break. Marshall always says to me, he says, I have never worked with a woman, no matter what level she was at. She could be a senior military officer or a CEO or run a global nonprofit. He said, I've never worked with a woman where at a certain point I didn't have to say, please don't be so hard on yourself. And that being hard on yourself is part of that stress that comes from trying to do everything perfectly. Even more important, we create stress for people around us. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat in where they're trying to decide on candidates for a job, and a highly qualified woman's name comes up, and they say, she is so smart, she's so good at what she does, she's just terrific, but people find her so stressful to work for. And that's because she's a perfectionist. They always add, she holds herself to the same high standard, but she holds everybody to this high standard. So I always say every time I speak that for 35 years, I've been doing this work, and I've never once heard anyone say, I work for a perfectionistic boss and I love it. On the other hand, I've never heard anyone say, my mother was a perfectionist and I loved it. So perfectionism does not do us favors. We need to develop ways to be thinking about how we're going to assess the relative importance of something. Is this something that needs to be done 80%, 90%? Is 95% okay? We need to think about that. We need to ask about that. Now, you may say, and you want to get in the habit of taking measured risks. That's a very important way to begin to address perfectionism. And it's something that really works well with clients. Push them into a situation where they're doing something that they're not good at and kind of can't be good at, probably, like me with technology. Oh, I'll help you with that. I'm going to be bad. I'm going to be seriously bad. So taking a risk by doing something that you're not going to be good at gets you more comfortable with that feeling of taking risks. So that's a very, very good, you don't need to do that on your job. You can do it on, a volunteer effort you're part of or whatever, but it just has the impact of relaxing you. So do mantras and things that remind you that you're not perfect. And, Marshall's famous, let it go. those things are very, very helpful. But one question I'm going to head off here, because I get it all the time. I get the question, I hear what you're saying, but the job I work in, things really do have to be perfect. I'm, producing, data for economic analysis, whatever it is. And I have a little story about that puts that in perspective. I was talking about the perfectionism right before our lockdown. I was in London. It was a big stage with a lot of people, central London. And I was talking about perfectionism and how it doesn't serve us. And I just kind of tossed off my head. I said, I probably, if you're a brain surgeon, it's different. You do want perfectionism. You do want perfection then. And after the event, this woman came up to me and she said, I'm here to challenge you on what you said about surgeons. She said, I am the chief of surgery at the Royal Ophthalmological Hospital down the road. She said, and I am here to tell you that perfectionistic surgeons get all the worst results, because they're inflexible and because they terrify their team. So I thought, okay, if being a perfectionist doesn't serve you as a surgeon, it probably doesn't serve you in any aspect or endeavor in your life.